Szabo is a leading voice on youth mental health education. He is wellness director at Geffen Academy at UCLA, where he works to change how students learn about their mental health. During the 8 years, he was director of National Mental Health Awareness Campaign. He created the first National Youth Mental Health Speakers Bureau, a program that has inspired millions to address their mental health. Ross is also an award-winning speaker, has addressed over 2 million people with his keynotes, and has given a recent TED Talk on the power of language for mental health. He is co-director of Behind Happy Faces, Taking Charge of Your Mental Health, used as common reading at multiple universities, and author of a kid's book about anxiety, which was featured on Oprah's Favorite Things list. His Behind Happy Faces mental health curriculum is used by over 250,000 students. Ross's achievements in the mental health field have earned him the 2010 Didi Hirsch Erasing the Stigma Leadership Award, the 2012 Changing Minds Award, the 2016 Excellence in Education Award, and his advocacy work was entered into the congressional record. Thank you so much, Ross, for being here with me.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to ask you about is your TED Talk. So you speak about viewing mental health the same way we view physical health. So my question is, how can parents use this comparison to help remove that stigma of mental health for their adolescents?
That's a really important question. And there's a couple of ways that you could do it. One, we teach physical health being about taking care of yourself, eating healthily, knowing your family history, exercising, all of those things. And when we talk about physical health, we really do understand that there's a spectrum out there for it. And as a parent, I think it's really important to take a similar approach with mental health. Focus on the skills they can build, focus on the resilience they can have, focus on how they develop these different skills to address challenges in their life instead of looking at mental health as just emotions or just bad. And then the next thing I think is it's really important to help kids separate mental health challenges into different categories, understanding that there are everyday influences, there are environmental factors, there are significant events, and then there are actual disorders. I think, unfortunately, sometimes in our society right now, we're so scared about, so many things that we're worried that like all of these emotions are bigger than they are. It's okay for your kid to be nervous. It is okay for your kid to be sad or upset. It's okay for your kid to not like something about their body or something about themselves. I think we're seeing a problem where when we take those issues and make them bigger than they are, where we replace the word nervous with just anxiety or replace the word sad with just depressed. So I think one of the best things parents can do is really think about mental health in that same line of physical health of how can we build these skills.
Yeah, and I think something you said in the talk was, uh, I mean, I don't know if you'd say pretty much everyone, but many of us are on that spectrum somewhere, right? So, it's okay to, you likened it to like going in the gym to work out, right? That doesn't mean there's something quote unquote wrong with you or there's a diagnosis there, but we can all work on it in the same way. Am I on the right track with that?
Definitely. What I talk about in the talk is when we think about physical health, we've normalized using resources or needing help for our physical health. We
Yeah.
exercise, we eat healthily, we do these other things. And oftentimes when we see people doing those things, we celebrate them. We're like, oh, good for them. We're
Yeah.
still in a place with mental health where we're not at that same level of normalization. We don't
Yeah.
celebrate everyone who is using resources to take care of their mental health. And that's another good thing parents can do is just encourage and understand that, hey, we are not going to be able to take care of our mental health on our own. So what are the different things we might need to benefit us?
Right. Okay. So in your work, you attribute technology and social media specifically as a contributor to the current youth mental health crisis. I know we both agree that it's not the full story, but it's definitely part of the story. So can you explain why you say that?
A lot of research has shown that technology and the technological age has changed our brains. So if you think back thousands of years ago when humans just started speaking languages, they spoke enough languages similarly enough to be able to communicate and navigate the globe. And our brain had to change for that. We weren't born with language. And
Yeah.
then we weren't, we didn't, humans didn't evolve with language. It came about. And then around 600 years ago, the human brain had to change again to a reading brain. Both of those changes allowed humans to activate their cortexes so that they could, use all parts of their brain and think and process. If you think about reading your favorite fiction book, you had to create characters, scenes, stories, all kinds of stuff. Technology has switched that to a place where we're not using as much of our brain. We are really just using the part of our brain that has the fight or flight mechanism in it, which is the limbic system. And because we're in that part of our brain so much, we have higher rates of loneliness and anxiety and depression and sadness because we're not activating the parts of our brain that actually need these other things. And when that part of the brain is activated, then we also don't seek out other aspects of our lives, like relationships, nature, aspects like that. And so that's just kind of the briefest example I can give about how technology is changing our brain.
Yeah. And I mean, I know at Geffen you work with adolescents, middle school and high school. Is that something that you're seeing in your work day to day as well? Just the effect of social media specifically?
Definitely. We don't have as long of attention spans. We don't have as long of a patience. We don't have a lot of different things. And when our lives aren't stimulated, then we feel bored or we feel any kind of other emotion. It's often a good like experiment to think to yourself like, am I actually lonely or am I just not stimulated right now? Am I
Yeah.
actually sad or am I just not getting this constant stream of stimulation that I'm used to? And it does
Hmm.
take the brain a little bit to go back to slower pace, just not having all that stimulation. But that's part of it. When you see some of these emotions and some of these things happening, it's that we live in such a fast-paced world that when it's not as fast-paced, our brains are kind of trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, one of the things that came to mind, we advocate a lot. We work with younger kids with our curriculum and we teach them about boredom and how it's good for you. But if you're familiar with like Anna Lemke's work, she wrote Dopamine Nation and she's a leading scientist in this field. She talks about, boredom being one of those emotions that's also painful, right? So I can see where kids the age that you deal with would maybe like and kind of lump those emotions together, right? Like you were just saying, they might just be bored, not being stimulated, and maybe they're confusing it for another emotion. Is that true? Do you think?
Definitely. I mean, even if you think about our generation, boredom was like the norm. We
Yeah.
grew up in a time. Uh, it's always funny for me to explain to kids that I grew up before the internet. And
Yeah.
when I went to college, we had a class on how to send an email. I was like,
Hmm.
what? What is this email? What do we do with it?
Yeah.
And so I think that we grew up at a time where you had to fill the boredom, or you just realized, like, okay, this is what life is. We didn't have an option of having everything filled for us or having dopamine hitting us at all times. We had to create that. And so, yeah, that's definitely a piece of it.
Yeah, we were definitely conditioned for it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so second to early childhood, age 12 to 25 is the largest period of brain development.
Mhm.
So, how do you think the use of modern screen technology use affects the developing mind in adolescents and young adults? You've touched on this a little bit, but I suppose specifically in the brain, the developing mind.
And this is a really important point. That second largest period of brain growth from 12 to 25 is when we often develop coping mechanisms for the rest of our lives. I often joke with people that being an adult is either undoing adolescence or reliving adolescence, depending on your level of self awareness,
Yeah.
because so much of what happens in that 12 to 25 period with loss, change, rejection, with our first experiences with love and all of those things tend to frame who we are. And so
Hmm.
when you mix technology into that, you're actually creating brains that are getting hardwired for the rest of their life in different ways. And if they're getting hardwired with that constant loop of stimulation, of attention, of validation, of attraction, of all these other things, then you're creating a world where they kind of need that for the rest of their life. But the bigger things that we're seeing from a statistical perspective is that technology is filling the gaps of relationships, of all of these other things, of what life milestones that people would have had that they're not even seeking out. People aren't
Mhm.
seeking out driver's licenses as much as as much as they were. The rate of people who have had a sexual partner between the ages of 18 and 30 has is so there's around 40% of people aren't even having sex in that age range. And then when you ask people if they're even asking people to go out on dates, it's abysmally low. 60% of males reported they haven't even asked someone out in the past year in that age of 18 to 30. So a lot of times when we think about like, oh, what's happening to the brain, we tend to think like damage, 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 or the typical social media technology talking points, but it's actually delaying our ability to have relationships or to do the things that sustain us.
Yeah, I think I know there's other experts that have focused in on this idea of failure to launch, which I think is a little bit of what you're talking about, and it's a complicated issue. But I do think it also goes back to what you were saying earlier when you were describing tech sort of taking the place of these real world experiences, right? So we can attach that to, I don't know, maybe porn taking the place of like
Mhm.
real relationships, right? And so on. So that's what I think about when you speak to this. It's bigger than the brain. It's a societal change and shift that's happening as well. Okay, so you speak in your work about everyone having what like an external life and an internal
Mhm.
life, and those are often at ends, right? Particularly when it comes to things like social media. So, how does the use of social media in adolescence affect external and internal views of an individual?
And this isn't a new concept. And where this comes from for me is when I was a senior in high school, I attempted to take my own life. And at the time, I had the perfect like college resume, the perfect outside appearance, but inside was battling really crippling depression. And
Yeah,
so the concept of an external life versus an internal life isn't new. That's been around for probably as long as modern society. You can go all the way back to the earliest civilizations and people showing a very different life than they actually lived, right? But what we're seeing with the digital world and technology and especially social media is your audience has completely changed. When I was in high school, I had to worry about I don't know, 1,800, 2,000 kids I went to high school with and what their thoughts of me were. And the reality is, I didn't see all of them anyway.
yeah,
Now, you post something online or you compare yourself to someone online, you're actually comparing yourself to billions of people.
yeah,
And when people see certain people getting the attention, the likes, the clicks, the followers, everything else, and they don't have it, it can only create this feedback loop of something's wrong, or you're not good enough, or you're not valuable enough. And so we went from an external, internal life of just our small local communities to now external versus internal life of billions of people. And what's really scary about it too is when you look at the amount of influencers or people who are successful on social media taking their own lives or not being
yeah,
able to keep up. And part of that is the rat race. As much as we can look at the problems for people who aren't getting what they need from social media, there are just as many mental health issues for the people who are, and there's no one winning in that
yeah.
in that race because uh, I don't know. There's many times where I'm on my phone and I'm bored by every single thing I see. I don't see anything interesting, and there are times where I look and I think like, if this is what is being sold as being like popular or what we're supposed to be doing, I don't want to be a part of this anyway. Like this is really sad. So I think that that external internal conundrum that has been around for as long as humans have is just getting enhanced in such a dangerous way.
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit, the idea of social comparison. In our curriculum, we talk to the adolescents about this idea. And like you said, it's been around forever. But the way we explain it is it's like a supercharged version of it, right? So for you and I, growing up when we did, things were contained not only to a certain amount of people, but you could also escape from it. You could go home and be away from it. Now, not only is the volume so much higher, but it's a 24-hour challenge, which is just exhausting for everyone. And to your point about, the boredom, we're all expected to be performers, right? And again, as a social media marketer, like I know that it's just about volume. The more you push stuff out, the more it puts you up in the algorithm and so on. And there's just so many interesting things that are going on in our lives, right?
Hmm.
To post about, right? And a lot of these kids, and we've heard this from other experts as well, just feel like they need to be performing all the time. And that's just an exhausting place to come from, because maybe you're not even a
Hmm.
performer. Maybe that's not even your thing, but we're all expected to do it. So it's a complicated question, I know, but the way we think about it is yes, it's been there, but it's just so much more potent now than it ever was.
Hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. So in your work, you speak about, again, mental health being on a spectrum. And we talked about this already, but many of us are on some part of that spectrum, right? So we do know that there's no evidence, at least that so far, that social media can cause a mental health disorder, right?
Hmm.
But there is growing evidence that if you're going into it with some kind of mental health concern, whether it's diagnosed or not, like let's take depression, anxiety, that it can amplify it, right? So,
Hmm.
what effect does social media have, do you think, on adolescents that are already coping with mental health issues, right? Whether we're talking about an emotion or a disorder?
First, I want to clarify what I mean by a mental health spectrum. I think a lot of times when people hear that, they think like on one side you're sane, and then on the other side you have like a severe mental health disorder. As someone who's been diagnosed with a severe mental health disorder and is also sane at the same time, I think we need to start treating a mental health spectrum more towards what we need to take care of our challenges versus just having an issue. So if you think about like a physical health spectrum, we tend to choose an issue and think, okay, what do I need to function? So if I have a cold, I can push through. I don't really need that many resources. It's difficult, but I'm all right. Whereas if I have the flu, I'm not able to balance. I'm struggling, right? And so for me, it's really important that when we say mental health spectrum, we identify that there are people who might be able to deal with some of their challenges, and then there are people who are going to need more resources, and then there are people who are going to need constant support, and then there are going to be people who, even if they have resources and constant support, the mental health issue they're facing is so large that nothing they do can balance it. So I think it's always important to kind of clarify that. When you talk about young people who are already going on to social media with anxiety or clinical depression or diagnoses, you hear two different things. One, you hear people saying it's a way for me to connect, and it's a way for me to be able to talk to people that I never had before. And I found some kind of saving grace in it that I wouldn't have had in my regular life. We don't know if that's true because they could have found someone in real life that they connected with, but that's definitely what they feel when they are online with those severe disorders. And those are the success stories, and we have to acknowledge that those success stories happen. We can't say those success stories wouldn't happen in real life because they also could, but we don't live in that world anymore. And then the second piece is there are kids who go on there who it's just enhancing everything that is wrong, and it's actually uh, helping them find like really terrible coping mechanisms, or when they're not getting that stimulation that we talked about earlier, feeling more anxious, feeling more depressed, feeling more lonely. So it's really difficult because on one hand we do have to acknowledge that for some people it is beneficial, but on the other hand we have to try and reach kids to help them understand that, like, uh, outside of those benefits you're getting, you're also struggling in ways you may not if you just put your phone away or if you just were able to take a break from social media.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously the reason this topic is so hard is first of all, it's very individual, and second of all, there's pros and cons of everything, right? And I think what you were talking about earlier was maybe kids that are from more marginalized, in communities that might be more marginalized in society, right? Whether it's I don't know, trans kid living in the Midwest or something like that, right? That can seek and find community online. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. But just on the other hand, when you talked about the second part, just kind of knowing the way these algorithms work, if I do go online and I'm already feeling a little depressed, if I just linger or, maybe look at or read something that, or let's take body image. I'm already not feeling great about my body. Let's say I linger, look at one piece of thinspo, right? Something where, there's an unhealthy beauty standard or something going on. That algorithm's going to continue to feed me more of that content, right? Until I go deeper and deeper into that rabbit hole where, if I hadn't done that to begin with, maybe it would have stayed on that, on the surface of a concern that maybe most of us have, right? So yeah, it can go both ways, but definitely the algorithms can enhance, I suppose, the way somebody's already feeling. That's what they're designed to do. So
Hmm.
okay. So my next question is about schools because I know you come from that world, and it's you're in an amazing place, Geffen Academy, that has put a value on having mental health curriculum. So my question to you is, why should all schools have mental health curriculum?
I think there's a responsibility we all have right now for schools to teach about mental health the same way you learn about physical health. And we have a mental health education institute at Geffen Academy at UCLA where we have different tiered systems for how that can happen. So there are public schools that don't have as much space or as many people who could teach this, but there is a possibility to teach 6 to 8 lessons a year that just focus on mental health being the same as physical health. In the independent schools, and I'm in an independent school, they could devote the resources, the time, and the people to do this. The one thing that I think is important is when we were developing our program, and just to be clear, I'm a founding faculty member of Geffen Academy at UCLA. And when we were creating the school, we asked the question, what if kids could have a class where they learn about mental health once a week, every week as part of their education? The reason we did that was because at UCLA, there are 57 counselors in the counseling center, and they can't keep up with the amount of students that are in the center. And the students in the center aren't coming with severe mental health disorders. They are coming because they don't know how to talk to a roommate, because they don't know how to ask someone out on a date, because they don't have the basic life skills they need to actually function after high school. And so we had an idea of, well, what if we just started creating or talking about these skills at a young age? We do this from a public health perspective and not a therapeutic perspective. Schools can't be therapy centers. They can't be places where kids unpack all these emotions and talk about feelings and then go take a test. But they can be a place where you learn about your mental health similar to your physical health, where you learn a vocabulary, where you understand brain development, where you understand peer support. And so I think that the future of schools is going to be trying to figure out how to do this. I always tell people the mental health crisis is a giant puzzle, and teaching about it in schools is just one missing piece. It is not the solve, it is not the cure all. There is actually no singular cure all, but it is a piece. It can be done. We've shown that it can be done. And now we're using our Mental Health Education Institute in the summer to help schools figure out how to expand it.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, two things. We teach anatomy, right? I mean, I think just breaking down maybe the basics of how the brain works. I mean, you're not necessarily, like you said, diving into therapy or anything like that, but that can be incredibly empowering just for kids to understand what's going on in their brain, especially during this critical time where so much is going on and they might feel crazy, where it could be very soothing to just know this is normal. This is something that everybody's brain is doing. And then the second thing is I also liken it to just like something like teaching the food groups, right? Like if you give people those kind of basic building blocks, you're not telling them necessarily how to eat, what to eat, but you're giving them, just a foundation for of understanding. So that's my
Hmm.
understanding anyway of maybe what you're trying to do in your work at
Yeah,
Geffen. Okay,
definitely.
great. So the last question is a bit of a hot button topic. So, in the recent Common Sense Media report, which documented youth smartphone use, kids in that 11 to 17 age group received, and this was the median number, 237 notifications a day, and a quarter of those were during the school day. So, given again everything we've been talking about, the correlation between social media use and youth mental health, should smartphones be allowed on K through 12 campuses?
At Geffen Academy, we have a Yonder pouch, which is basically the kind of concert pouch. So each morning, all of our students, grades 6 through 11, we let our seniors keep them, put their phone in a pouch, and it's locked for the rest of the day. I would say that, especially in middle school, it makes a huge difference because they're not distracted. In my opinion, if you look at like what other schools are doing, states, countries are doing right now. So the UK banned schools and phone. China banned schools. Sorry, banned phones in school, and China banned phones in school. Australia just banned phones in school. I think that it makes a lot of sense. And the argument that I always hear in the United States is, but we need our kids to have their phones because if there's a school shooting, then we
Yeah.
need to be able to know what to do. What 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 world are we living in where the advocates for phones in schools are happening because their school shootings are so common that like that's what we need them to do. So for
Yeah.
me, couple of things to fix there, but no, I don't think phones are beneficial in a school. I don't see any data that shows it, and I don't see any actual evidence when I'm in a school that supports kids having their phones.
Yeah, I mean, what you guys are doing with the Yonder pouch, that makes a lot of sense because there is research that shows even the presence of a phone is distracting. So even inside the backpack, but being kind of an out of sight, out of mind, or having some kind of physical separation is definitely effective. First of all, and yeah, we do reference school shootings a lot because it's the reason that parents give for their pushback because many schools want to do this, but it's the parents that are pushing back. But in fact,
Hmm.
if you talk to emergency management specialists, and this is logical, they will tell you that they're actually more harmful than hurtful, more hurtful than harmful in those situations. Because think about it, they're loud. The students, like, let's say, God forbid, like, there was a situation like that, they should be paying attention. They should be have
Mm.
all their wits about them, not be distracted by a device. So it's actually a misconception that they keep everybody safer in those situations. So there's definitely, as you said, movements for sure in other countries, some here, but it's school by school. And it's challenging because it is a perception of safety on the parents' part. So,
Hmm.
um, okay. So I I so appreciate your time and your expertise and everything you're doing from an educator's point of view. And thank you again for taking your time to talk with me.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and keep up all the amazing work you're doing too.
Thank you so much.